Hi, this is Shaz from Integrella. This is the third in our series of videos on how to run an API pilot. In this video, we delve into the considerations that are technical in nature, but are not tied to a specific choice of technology or platform. I hope you enjoy the video.
Any thoughts, Marcus?
Yeah, it just kind of came to mind, I guess, before you really think about the specific technologies that you're going to work with around APIs, you might want to consider what are the key building blocks that you need in terms of an API platform. How you're actually going to create, build your APIs and deploy them, and how you're going to monitor and manage them. So there's quite a few considerations. You might want to think about security and identity access management. So there's all these different building blocks. And what about that selection process for the technology? So would you have typically gone through the kind of the building blocks phase and the technology selection by the time you get to pilot?
Mm-hmm. We'll cover some of those aspects, I think, in what comes forward, but all very sensible questions. So we're sort of broken this up into two broad buckets. So there are considerations that are technology agnostic and considerations that are technology specific. We'll touch on the agnostic items first. So the first things that I would say is that if you go out into the market and you look online, you look at the sort of resources that are the material that's available, there is a lot of information available on API delivery and API management. But there are some principles that really, I would say, are common to much of what you read. And what I want to do is just touch on one of them as an example of something that I think is fundamental to a pilot exercise. And this concept of outside in versus inside out as a design pattern is something that I'm quite, I suppose, fixated on this desire to put the consumer first and look at API design in a certain way. Now, this does drive a certain sequence in terms of your thought process. That's not to say that inside out is invalid. It certainly isn't. But as an example, this is an API management consideration that I think is really important. And you should look at the API management and delivery principles and think very carefully about which ones are important that you wish to try out for the purposes of a pilot. I cannot stress that point enough. The purposes of a pilot. It's not an academic exercise. Another one that I haven't mentioned here is the delivery approach. APIs themselves lend themselves very nicely to agile delivery methods. Organizations have different levels of maturity when it comes to delivering technology using an agile approach. And that's something that's really key to sort of determining up front. The second point I want to make is, as you go out there and you read and you absorb information, you come to your own conclusions, that in itself is a very academic exercise. So the one thing that you must do within a pilot, even if you only pick one principle, is convert that theory to practice. So you must pilot, how is it that I am actually going to design from an outside-in perspective? Who's going to do what? What artifacts am I going to produce? What are the thought processes that I'm going to align? These things are really important. Second thing I want to pick on that's technology agnostic is choosing a simple use case, a simple business process as a test bed. We talked earlier about prototype versus MVP versus pilot. For me, it makes sense to use a very simple business process and therefore target use case as a backdrop to your choice of pilot API or APIs. That's not to suggest that it must drive that business value, but what it does do is it makes it very tangible and real for your enterprise, which I think is important.
That's something that we touched on in the last webinar, isn't it, actually, in terms of how to go about selecting the right business process based on how much value you're going to get from it. And I agree with the outside-in perspective. I think that's one of the key differences between APIs and SOA, and there's really no value in an API if there are no consumers. So
yeah, absolutely. And one of the points, I suppose, as an extension of this is, it's probably not a very sexy word, but you need to get hands-on with the business analysis and requirements documentation. The use of APIs is a means to an end, and that end means working within your enterprise. So you do need to understand how that business executes, operates, and therefore how do APIs enable those business processes to execute better, or for new business processes to be enabled. So that's really important for me. APIs, as an approach to sharing data, talk about providers and consumers. And exactly as you just said, Marcus, an API is completely useless if you don't have any consumers. There are some other aspects of API design that are also completely useless, but we will come to those. You need to engage with the consumer that you have identified. That it has a fundamental part to play in the execution of that business process that you've identified. And my view is that you need to look at it through their eyes. So what is it that a developer or a business owner or process owner within the enterprise that will consume your API wants to see? What is it they don't want to see? What makes their life easy? What makes their life difficult? And I think that's really important from a pilot perspective, because this is how you are going to be working, if you are serious about APIs and API management. So we talked about a simple process and use case. APIs came about as a result of the mobile economy and a need to present data on mobile devices. That really kick-started APIs as an approach to sharing data. So why don't you pick something like that within your enterprise? Presentation of data within a portable mobile device as required during the execution of the business process. That to me seems like a sensible way to go, and doing it this way will pay dividends later when you start to scale this. No discussion about APIs would be complete without the two logos on the right hand side, in our opinion. So you need to really get stuck in with the design and the documentation of your APIs. Follow best practice, use get comfortable with the really core fundamental technologies, and the two logos on the right hand side, Open API specification 2.0 at the bottom, and the JSON format for the representation of data. These are absolutely fundamental and things that we believe are key. In terms of the API itself, the API's operation, I originally thought when I put this slide together that single API with some simple operations that operate on the data behind them in a CRUD format, but you could also do something even more simple on that. An API that simply retrieves a set of a data entity, and then an extension of that to retrieve that data based on some filtering. So really, really simple.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point. If you're going to go about designing an API, you definitely use JSON in this day and age. However, I was just speaking to a customer this morning actually, and they They have an ESB style solution, which is heavily using an XML based standard. And you can, just worth pointing out, you can use XML in your REST APIs. And there are times when it might make sense if there is a very comprehensive, well-known standard that's working well, maybe stick with that. But if you're going to design something from scratch, JSON is just the way it's going.
Great. So we touched on consumers. The flip side of that is you need to engage very, very closely with a providers, where that data is hosted. And I mentioned earlier that without a consumer, an API is pretty useless. Well, without the right engagement with a provider that's going to source the data that API exposes, your API is also pretty useless. So you need to be very, very clear in your understanding of the data sharing requirements for the process that you have chosen and where that data is hosted and mastered, actually, and the controls around that. The thing that you will come up against very, very quickly is, well, how do I get access to that data? What formats is that data in logically? And we'll talk about the technicalities a bit later, but what are the mechanisms that allow that data within that provider system to be made available? And the point I'm making here is a subtle one. It's not just about the technical hooks that are available. It's a more process and business view of data that is what I'm talking about. So subject close to my heart is any kind of IT activity with an enterprise must be against the backdrop of a clear delivery plan and with clear control mechanisms over that execution. And that is fundamental to the success of the pilot and fundamental to be able to not only track progress, but to determine, has this been successful or not. So, have a plan, have a delivery plan, and make sure you've got the right control mechanisms around it. We've talked about a lot of technology agnostic stuff earlier on in this section. We talked about business process. That isn't a technology specific activity, and you need to have the right skill sets within the people that are going to take part in a pilot to be able to carry out those activities, to make the link between business process and technology, and having the right people in place that will enable those activities are very important. One point I want to make is that second to last statement of API design is a very, very interesting one, because API design, elements of that can be carried out by business process owners, business analysts, data architects, and it is an element when you are working outside in that is fundamental to delivering an API that puts the consumer first and puts an enterprise view of your data first, above the technical elements of hooking into an application and building the API itself. And the reason this is in here is harking back to my earlier point of a pilot is sort of an elevated above a prototype. It's not just about the technology, it's about understanding the business view of data, how process executes within an enterprise.
Would you typically expect, as a result of the pilot, to kind of validate your assumptions on the team that you need?
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
So the size of the team, whether it's going to be internal or external resource, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.